Thomas Hale rode slowly across the open land as the sun dropped behind the far hills. The sky was turning orange and purple, and the air had that cool bite that came right before night. His horse moved at a steady pace, and Thomas sat tall in the saddle, though his shoulders felt heavier than the pack he carried. He had spent the entire day in town selling cattle, talking to buyers, and listening to people laugh in the saloon, even though he stayed quiet and kept to himself. Crowds always made him feel out of place. The ranch was the only place where he felt he belonged, even though it had become a lonely place over the years. He missed the sound of someone humming in the kitchen, missed the gentle footsteps that once filled the wooden floors, missed the warmth he used to feel when he opened the front door. His wife had passed away long ago, taken by a sudden fever. After that, the ranch felt like a house with the windows open in winter. Nothing inside could stay warm for long. Thomas told himself he had grown used to silence, but the truth was, every evening ride back home reminded him of what he lost. As he crossed near the railway track, he expected nothing more than quiet, wind, and the distant sound of the train that sometimes passed at this hour. But tonight, he heard something else. At first it was so faint he thought the wind was playing tricks on him, a small sound, almost like a weak cry. Thomas slowed his horse and listened. There it was again, a soft, broken voice. Not an animal. Human. He turned his horse toward the sound, guiding it carefully along the narrow stretch of land beside the tracks. The ground dipped slightly, and a gust of cold wind rushed over him. Then he saw something that made him sit up straight. A woman lay near the base of the tracks, half covered in dust, her hair tangled, her arms scraped and bruised. Her dress was torn at the side, and her boots were scuffed as if she had been dragged. She tried to push herself upright, but her hands slipped, and she fell back with a quiet gasp of pain. Thomas jumped down from his horse so fast the animal jerked in surprise. He knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice was gentle but firm. The woman opened her eyes slightly. They were tired, frightened, and filled with confusion. "Please, don't leave me here," she whispered. "I won't," Thomas said softly. "You're safe now." She tried to breathe evenly, but each breath seemed to hurt. Thomas noticed the way she held her side, the way her legs trembled, the way she winced even when he only touched her shoulder. "What happened?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "They made me get off. No, they threw me off," she said, her voice shaking. "On the train. I tried to stop him. He wanted to take my seat, and I said no. He had been drinking. No one helped me." Thomas felt a cold anger settle in his chest, not the kind that burned wildly, but the kind that chilled a man from the inside. He had seen this sort of cruelty before, people looking away when someone needed help, people letting harm happen because it was easier to stay silent. The woman continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I walked between the train cars to report him. He followed me. He shoved me out when the train slowed on a curve. I don't even know where I am." "You're near my land," Thomas said. "A few miles from town. You're hurt and cold. Let me take you to my home." She hesitated, her eyes filling with uncertainty, maybe even fear. Why would you help me?" Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. Dirt on her face, bruises on her arms, the way she tried to stay strong even though she was shaking. "Because someone should have helped you from the beginning," he said quietly. He gently slipped his arms under her. She tensed for a moment, but when she felt his steady grip, she relaxed a little. Thomas lifted her carefully, trying not to cause more pain. She was light, but he could feel how weak she had become. He set her gently on his horse and climbed up behind her, holding her steady so she wouldn't fall. She leaned against him, her eyes fluttering shut from exhaustion. As he rode toward the ranch, the land grew darker. The night wind picked up, carrying a chill that made her shiver. Thomas removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her. She tried to protest. "You'll freeze," she murmured. "I'm used to the cold," he replied. "You're not." They rode in silence after that. The only sounds were the horses' hooves tapping the ground and the distant whistle of a passing train far away. The woman's breath came slow and uneven, like each one took effort. Thomas adjusted his hold, making sure she stayed warm and upright. He wondered what she had been trying to reach before all this happened. He wondered how far she had traveled, whether she had family waiting somewhere, whether she had dreams she was chasing or running from. But he didn't ask. It wasn't the right time. When they reached his ranch, the house looked small against the moonlit sky. Thomas helped her down from the horse and carried her inside. The house, though old and quiet, suddenly felt different with another person inside. He placed her in the spare room, the one he rarely entered anymore. He lit a lamp, letting warm yellow light fill the space. She blinked up at him. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "Thomas Hale," he said. "I'm Evelyn," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "Evelyn, you're safe here. I'll get you some warm water and something to drink." He left the room for a moment, heating water on the stove and bringing a cup of warm tea. When he returned, Evelyn tried to sit up but winced. Thomas gently helped her, placing pillows behind her back. She held the cup shakily, her hands trembling from cold and shock. He stayed close in case she needed help, but he didn't crowd her. He respected her space. Evelyn took a sip, then another. Her eyes softened a little. I thought no one would find me," she said. Thomas pulled a chair beside the bed, but didn't sit down yet. He stood quietly, listening. "I'm glad I came by when I did," he said. "But try to rest now. You're safe." She set the cup aside and lay back. Even though her face was tired, a small sense of relief showed in her expression. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first moment she didn't look afraid. Thomas turned down the lamp flame and stepped toward the door. But instead of going back to his own room, he sat in the wooden chair just outside hers. He kept his hat on his knee, and his boots rested on the old rug. He didn't know why he felt the need to sit there, but he did. Maybe it was because he didn't trust the night. Maybe it was because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone in a strange place after everything she had been through. From inside the room he could hear her breathing, slow, uneven at first, then gradually settling into a soft rhythm. She was asleep. He stayed awake a long while, watching the shadows on the walls and thinking about the world, about the train, about the people who had looked the other way when she needed help. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a man who saved the world. But tonight, he had saved one person, and somehow, that mattered more than anything else. Inside the room, Evelyn slept deeply for the first time in days. She didn't know yet how her life would change. She didn't know that the ranch, which had been quiet for years, was about to become a place where two wounded hearts found something unexpected. Evelyn woke the next morning to a soft glow of light on the window and the faint sound of birds outside. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her body felt heavy, and her mind was foggy. Then she remembered the cold tracks, the fall, the fear, and then the gentle voice of the man who had found her. She slowly lifted her head and looked around. The room was simple, but clean. A wooden dresser stood against the wall, and a wool blanket was tucked carefully around her. Her body ached when she tried to move, and she let out a quiet groan. The door opened a second later, and Thomas stepped inside, holding a small tray. He didn't smile much, but the kindness in his eyes made her relax. "You're awake," he said softly. "I brought breakfast." Evelyn pushed herself upright with his help. The smell of warm bread and tea rose from the tray. Her stomach tightened with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the day before the train incident. Thomas placed the tray on her lap and stepped back, giving her space. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't expect this." "You need strength," Thomas replied. "Eat what you can." He didn't leave right away, but he didn't stare either. He simply stood near the door, making sure she wasn't in pain. Evelyn took a bite of the bread. It was soft and tasted fresh. She felt warmth spread through her chest, not just from the food, but from the feeling of being cared for without anyone asking for anything in return. After a few minutes, Thomas spoke again. "If you're feeling well enough later, I'll show you around the house and the land. But only if you want to. You can rest as much as you need." Evelyn nodded. "I'll try. I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble," he said firmly. "You're a guest." He left the room to tend to his morning chores. Evelyn watched the door close softly and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. She finished her meal slowly, then forced herself to stand. Her legs were weak, but she held onto the wall until she steadied herself. She washed her face with the warm water Thomas had left in the small bowl on the dresser and brushed her hair with her fingers. She wanted to look presentable, at least a little. When she opened the door, she heard the sound of Thomas working outside, feeding his horses. She stepped carefully through the hallway and made her way toward the porch. Thomas turned when he heard her footsteps. "You should be resting," he said with concern. "I need some air," she said softly. "I've been lying down too long." He nodded and walked beside her, making sure she didn't lose balance. The porch overlooked a wide stretch of land, with rolling grass and fences leading out to the barns. The sky was clear blue, and the sun warmed her face. For a moment, she forgot everything that had happened. "This is beautiful," she murmured. "It's quiet," Thomas said. "Too quiet sometimes." She glanced at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He lived alone, worked alone, ate alone. Her heart tightened. She knew what loneliness felt like. Thomas continued feeding the horses, and Evelyn watched him work. He moved with calm, steady motions, like someone who had lived his whole life doing these tasks. She admired the way he treated the animals, with respect, not force. They trusted him, and so did she, though she didn't fully understand why yet. The next few days passed gently. Evelyn rested, helped in small ways, and grew stronger. She swept the porch, washed dishes, folded old blankets, and even arranged the kitchen shelves. Thomas tried to stop her, saying she needed more rest, but she insisted on helping. It made her feel useful again. One afternoon, while she was peeling potatoes at the kitchen table, she heard hoofbeats outside. Thomas opened the door with a serious look on his face. "Stay inside," he said quietly. Evelyn froze. "Is something wrong?" "Just stay here." Two men on horseback rode onto the property. From inside the kitchen, Evelyn heard them talking, their voices carried through the open windows. "We're looking for a woman," one man said. "Thrown off the train last night." Evelyn's heart began pounding. Her hands shook so hard she dropped the potato. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay calm. Thomas's voice was steady outside, but she could hear the tension in it. "I haven't seen anyone. Haven't been near the tracks since yesterday morning." "You're sure?" the man asked, sounding doubtful. "Positive?" There was a long silence. Then one of the men spat on the ground. "Railway doesn't want trouble. If someone finds her and she talks, they'll blame us. Better she stays missing." Evelyn felt sick. Her hands tightened into fists. The idea that her suffering mattered less than a company's reputation made her tremble with anger and fear. After a moment, the men turned their horses and left. Thomas waited until they were far down the road before stepping back inside. Evelyn stared at him, her voice trembling. "You lied for me." Thomas removed his hat and sighed. I didn't lie. I protected you. You're not ready to face them. They don't want the truth. They want silence. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them away. I don't want to cause trouble for you. They might come back. Thomas shook his head. Let them. I'm not afraid of men who push a woman off a train or the ones who cover for him. His calm strength steadied her. She felt something shift inside, something she couldn't name yet. As days passed, Evelyn opened up more about her past. She had grown up in a small town where her family worked hard but never seemed to catch a break. When her father lost his shop, everything fell apart. She had hoped to find work in a distant town, start fresh, maybe build a new life. But the train incident had torn that dream apart. Thomas didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were honest. He told her about his wife, how she used to plant flowers in the yard, how her laughter filled every corner of the house. The fever had taken her quickly, leaving Thomas with a grief so heavy that even the strongest horse couldn't have carried it. Evelyn listened carefully, her heart aching for him. She could see how much he missed his wife, but she also sensed a quiet strength in him, a strength built from years of surviving loneliness. One evening, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sunset. The sky looked like a painting made of gold and red. Thomas joined her, standing a respectful distance away. You've brought life back to this place, he said quietly. Evelyn turned to him, surprised. I haven't done anything special. You've filled the silence, he replied. I didn't realize how loud it was until it changed. Evelyn felt a warm flutter in her chest, but she looked away quickly. She didn't want to misunderstand him. He was kind, and she respected him deeply, but she didn't dare imagine anything more. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about everything. She wondered if the world outside the ranch knew she was still alive. She wondered if she was safe. She wondered how long she could stay without bringing danger to Thomas. In the quiet dark, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not be a burden. She would not take advantage of Thomas's kindness. She would stay until she was strong enough, until she could face whatever came next, whether it was justice or more danger. But she also knew something else. She felt safer here than anywhere else she had ever been. When she finally lay down, she didn't feel like a lost traveler anymore. She felt like someone who had been found. As she drifted into sleep, she didn't know that new challenges were coming. People who would come searching for answers, a man who wanted to hide the truth, and a decision she would have to make that could change both her life and Thomas's forever. But for now, in the calm night air of the ranch, she rested with the quiet knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. Evelyn woke early the next morning with a strange heaviness in her chest. For days, she had been trying to rebuild her strength, helping around the ranch and trying to make herself useful. But the fear she carried never fully went away. She knew someone out there, someone from that train, might return. Someone might decide the easiest way to hide the truth was to erase her completely. She didn't want to think about it, but her body reacted before her mind did. Her hands felt cold, and her heartbeat was faster than normal. Thomas noticed immediately during breakfast. Evelyn sat at the table holding a spoon but not eating. He watched her for a moment. "You're restless," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "I feel like something is coming, like the quiet won't last." Thomas set his cup down. "You're safe here. No one can reach you without passing me first." His voice was steady, but she could tell he had been thinking the same thing. Something had changed in town. Thomas had heard whispers when he rode in for supplies. People talked about the incident on the train, but no one agreed on what happened. Some said a woman had jumped. Some said she had stolen something. Others said she had been pushed. People repeated lies because they were easier. Evelyn sighed. "What if the truth never comes out? What if the man who pushed me never gets punished?" Thomas leaned forward. The truth has a way of reaching daylight even when people try to bury it. Evelyn looked at him, wondering if he believed that for real or if he was trying to comfort her. She didn't know, but his calm made her feel stronger. Later that day, Thomas went out to check the fences near the far end of his land. Evelyn stayed behind and cleaned the house, moving slowly at first because her side still hurt. After a while, she stepped outside and sat on the porch. The sun was warm, and the gentle wind brushed against her face. She closed her eyes, hoping for peace, even for a few minutes. Suddenly, she heard hoofbeats in the distance. Her eyes snapped open. She stood quickly but stayed close to the wall. A single rider approached from the road. He was wearing a long coat and carried a small notebook. He looked different from the men who had come before. His posture was straight, his face serious but not cruel. He stopped near the porch. Evelyn's heart beat hard in her chest. "Is this Thomas Hale's property?" the man asked. Evelyn didn't answer at first. Then the man added, "I'm a railway investigator. I'm looking for information about the incident that happened 3 nights ago." Evelyn froze. This was it. The moment she had feared. She didn't know if he was a good man or one of the people who wanted to silence the matter. Her breath trembled. Before she could respond, Thomas appeared behind the barn and began walking toward them. His shoulders were broad and his expression firm. "What business do you have here?" Thomas asked, not raising his voice but making it clear he was in control of his land. The investigator stayed calm. "My name is Samuel Turner. I'm trying to understand what happened on that train. There are contradictions in the reports. Some people say a woman fell. Some say she jumped." Thomas stepped closer. Evelyn held her breath. The investigator noticed her but didn't speak to her directly yet. Thomas said, "Those stories are false." Samuel Turner studied Thomas's face carefully, then looked again at Evelyn. His eyes softened just slightly. "Ma'am," he said gently, "were you on that train?" Evelyn felt fear rising inside her, but she forced herself to stand straight. She didn't want Thomas to fight for her alone. She had to speak. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was." The investigator nodded slowly. "Would you tell me what happened? Only if you feel safe." Thomas glanced at her, giving her silent support. Evelyn took a deep breath. "I was sitting in my seat," she began. "A man who had been drinking demanded I give it up. I refused. I didn't want trouble, but he pushed me. I went to find someone in charge. He followed me between the cars. When the train slowed for a curve, he shoved me off." She felt her voice quiver at the end, but she didn't look away. The investigator listened without interrupting. He wrote something down, then asked, "Did anyone else see this?" Evelyn shook her head. "If they did, they didn't help me." Samuel Turner hesitated for a moment. "There was a young train worker who came to our office early this morning. He said he witnessed something but was too afraid to speak earlier. He claims he saw the man push you." Evelyn's eyes widened. Hope flickered inside her chest, a fragile flame, but a real one. Thomas asked, "Where is this worker now?" "At the station office," Samuel replied. He agreed to give a statement. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Her knees felt weak. For days she had been certain the world had turned against her, that she would be blamed or ignored. Now someone believed her. Someone saw. Samuel closed his notebook. "Ma'am, you deserve justice, but it must come from your own voice as well. If you're willing, I'd like you to give your statement in town." Evelyn's fear returned sharply. "If I go there, I don't know what will happen." Thomas stepped closer to her. "You won't go alone." She looked up at him. His eyes were steady, and his presence felt like a shield. Samuel waited, giving her time. Finally, Evelyn nodded slowly. "I'll go." The investigator tipped his hat politely and rode away, leaving Thomas and Evelyn on the porch. Thomas turned to her. "You were brave." "I was shaking," she said quietly. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, he replied. It's facing it. The next morning, they prepared to go to town. Evelyn wore the cleanest dress she had, and Thomas saddled his horse with care. She felt nervous all the way there. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When they arrived, the streets were busy. People stared when they saw her riding beside Thomas. Whispers followed her, rising like dust. She lowered her gaze, but Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Inside the railway office, Samuel Turner greeted them. The young train worker was there too, a thin boy with worried eyes. When he saw Evelyn, he nodded shyly. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have spoken sooner, but I was scared." Evelyn smiled gently, forgiving him without needing words. She gave her full statement, describing the events clearly and calmly. Thomas stood beside her the entire time. Samuel Turner wrote everything down with serious attention, asking questions only when necessary. Afterward, Samuel said, "This information is enough to open an official investigation. The man who pushed you will be questioned." Evelyn's breath trembled. "Do you believe me?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, I believe you." She looked toward Thomas. He gave her a small nod, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. When they left the office, the town felt different. Some people still whispered, but others looked at her with sympathy. One woman even approached and handed her a small handkerchief. "I heard what happened," the woman said softly. "I'm glad you're safe." Evelyn almost cried from the kindness of that simple gesture. As Thomas and Evelyn rode back to the ranch, she leaned slightly into him, exhausted but relieved. The ranch came into view as the sun lowered, throwing long shadows across the land. It felt like returning to a sanctuary. When they reached the porch, Thomas helped her down. Evelyn turned to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Thomas didn't smile, but his voice carried warmth. "You did the hardest part. I only stood beside you." Inside the quiet house, Evelyn felt a new strength growing within her. The truth had been spoken, someone believed her, and Thomas had not left her side for a single moment. But she also knew something else. This was not the end of the story. Justice might be coming, but it wasn't finished yet. And she didn't know what the future held for her or for Thomas. What she did know, deep in her heart, was that she had found someone she trusted more than anyone else in the world. And that trust had changed everything. The next few days passed quietly on the ranch, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the heavy, empty silence that used to cling to Thomas's house. It was a calm, waiting silence, like the soft pause before a new chapter begins. Evelyn felt it too. Every morning when she stepped onto the porch, she breathed deeply, grateful just to be alive. And every time she saw Thomas working in the fields, she felt a warm ache in her chest, something she didn't have a name for yet. But life outside the ranch had not stopped. The railway company held meetings in town, and Samuel Turner continued his investigation. The man who had pushed Evelyn off the train was questioned again and again. At first, he denied everything. Then, when he learned there was a witness, he tried to twist the story. But the truth slowly closed in around him like tightening ropes. Thomas kept his distance from town, going only when necessary for supplies. He didn't like crowds or pointless gossip, and now people whispered even more when he walked through. They knew Evelyn was staying with him. Some talked kindly, others judged quietly. That didn't bother Thomas. He had lived long enough to know people always talked. One late afternoon, as the sun lowered toward the horizon, Thomas returned from the barn and found Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table with a folded letter in her hands. She looked worried. "What's that?" he asked. Evelyn took a breath before answering. "A messenger came earlier. Samuel Turner sent this." She held out the letter. "He wants me to come to town tomorrow." Thomas sat across from her. Did he say why? He says the investigation reached a point where they need me present. The man who hurt me is being brought in again. They want my final statement. Thomas studied her face. She looked unsure, almost afraid. But beneath that fear, he saw strength. The same strength she had shown the day she stood in the railway office and told her story without shaking. "Do you want to go?" he asked gently. Evelyn stared at the letter. "I don't know," she whispered. "Part of me wants everything to be over. Another part of me is scared to stand there again, scared to see him. What if he looks at me and I freeze? What if he lies again?" Thomas placed his hands on the table, his voice steady. "You won't face him alone. I'll be there." Her eyes softened. "You've done so much already. I don't want to depend on you forever." "You're not depending," Thomas said. "You're trusting, and trust is not a weakness." Evelyn lowered her gaze, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "All right," she whispered. "I'll go." The next morning, they rode to town together. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was clear. Evelyn held onto the saddle tightly. Thomas rode beside her, watching the road ahead with calm eyes. When they reached the town, people paused to look at them. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm with self-consciousness, but Thomas walked beside her as if the whole world was nothing more than open fields. Inside the railway office, Samuel Turner greeted them. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We're almost done." He guided them to a small room. Evelyn's heart pounded as she stepped inside. The man who had shoved her off the train sat on the other side of the table. He looked tired and angry, but more than anything, he looked cornered. He avoided her eyes. Samuel Turner placed a few papers on the table. "We have the witness statement, the worker's account, and we have your statement, Miss Evelyn. Now we need you to confirm one last time for the record." Evelyn felt her hands tremble. Thomas stood behind her chair, quiet but strong. She took a deep breath and nodded. Samuel asked her to describe the events once more. Evelyn spoke clearly, simply, without raising her voice. She told the truth exactly as it had happened. When she finished, the room was silent. The man across the table shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the investigator held up a hand. "The evidence is clear," Samuel said firmly. "Your actions were unlawful and dangerous. We will take the matter from here." The man glared at Evelyn. For a brief moment, she felt the same fear she had felt that night on the train. But then she remembered Thomas behind her, steady as a rock. She lifted her chin and met the man's gaze, calm, certain, unafraid. The man looked away first. Samuel Turner nodded with approval. "You did well," he said. "This will help us bring justice." Evelyn exhaled shakily but felt lighter than she had in weeks. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's go home," he said softly. They walked out into the sunlight and the air felt fresh, almost sweet. Evelyn looked back once at the office door, then turned away, leaving that part of her past behind her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of healing. Evelyn felt something inside her loosen, like a tight knot finally unraveling. When they reached the ranch, the world felt peaceful again. Evelyn took a deep breath and looked at the place that had become her shelter. She had arrived as a broken traveler with nowhere to go. Now she felt like she was returning to a home. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Evelyn joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The sky glowed with soft shades of gold and pink. "You're safe now," Thomas said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but there's something else." She looked down at her hands. "The railway company offered me a small payment and a train ticket. I can continue my journey now." Thomas stared at the horizon. His jaw tensed slightly, the only sign that her words affected him. "That's good," he said. "You have your life ahead of you." Evelyn watched him carefully. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the land like a man preparing himself to say goodbye. "I haven't decided whether I should go," she said in a soft voice. Thomas's hands stilled. "You have dreams," he said. "A future. I don't want to stand in the way of that." "You're not in the way," she whispered. "You helped me find myself again." Thomas turned to her slowly. His expression was calm, but something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "Evelyn, don't stay here because you feel you owe me. You don't owe me anything." She shook her head. "It's not about owing." Her voice quivered. "It's about where I feel safe, where I feel like I belong." Thomas stared at her, silent and unreadable. The wind blew gently across the porch, carrying the scent of earth and grass. Evelyn stood up slowly. "I have to choose," she said softly, "and I want to make the choice that feels right, not the choice that others expect." Thomas nodded once, though his eyes held a quiet sadness. "Whatever you choose, I'll support it." The next morning, the train was due to pass through town. Thomas saddled the horse early. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to change her mind. He simply prepared himself to let her go. The ride to town was long and silent. Thomas felt each step of the horse like a weight in his chest. Evelyn felt it too, every mile tightening something inside her. When they reached the small wooden platform, the wind was cool against her face. The train whistle echoed in the distance. Thomas helped her down, his hands steady but his eyes shadowed. "You'll be all right," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at the train coming closer, then back at Thomas. "I know." The train slowed with a hiss of steam. Passengers stepped off and on. Evelyn held the small ticket in her hand. Her heart beat painfully. Thomas took her bag and set it beside her. "You deserve a good life," he said softly. "A better life than the one you've known." Evelyn stared at him. Really stared. The man who found her on the cold ground near the tracks. The man who carried her home. The man who cared for her without asking for anything. The man who stood beside her through fear and truth. The train conductor called, "All aboard!" Evelyn looked at the train and didn't move. Thomas frowned slightly. "Evelyn?" She stepped closer to him. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I don't want to get on that train." Thomas blinked, stunned. "What?" "I don't want to leave," she said, shaking her head. "When I think about where I feel safe, where I feel seen, where I feel like I can breathe, it's not out there." She placed a hand on her chest. "It's here, with you." Thomas stood completely still, as if afraid she might disappear. "Are you sure?" Evelyn nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, I want to build a life with someone who cares, someone who stood by me when the whole world turned away. I want to stay, if you'll let me." For a moment, Thomas couldn't speak. Then he let out a slow breath. "You can stay, always." They left the station together, the train pulling away behind them. The sound faded, but the promise between them stayed strong. When they reached the ranch, the world felt warmer, brighter. Evelyn looked at the house not as a shelter, but as a place where her future began. Thomas stood beside her. And for the first time in years, he felt hope, gentle, steady, and real. And so the story ended not with a farewell at the tracks, but with two hearts finding a new beginning, built on courage, kindness, and quiet trust that grew stronger every day. For now all she knew was that she wasn't alone on the cold ground anymore. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared. Someone had brought her home.